My journey to creating charter schools was in and out of traditional politics. While I was in college at UC Santa Barbara, I started a college Democrat group. I was head of students for Carter in 1980 in the state of California. And then I ran for a while Jack O'Connell's first run for the state assembly. He later became superintendent of public instruction. And at the end, Willie Brown got really heavily involved, and Jack won by a little over 1,000 votes. And so, and from there I interned for Jerry Brown when he was governor of California. Got a job right out of college putting the Olympic torch relay together that was managed by one of Brown's advanced guys, and spent a year and a half on the road. Went right from that to the Gary Hart for President campaign, and then worked for Geraldine Ferraro after that. And then a pattern of working for the long shot dreamer candidates. So you remember President Hart, and then there was President Brown, and there was President Babbitt, and then there was President Bob Kerrey. We all remember him. And then the first dreamer was Barack Obama. But interspersed between that is I sold a book about my travels on the torch run, and I got a nice big six-figure advance, which was unheard of. That kept me out of law school in the Reagan 80s. And then I worked at Rock the Vote after working for the state Democratic Party. And so there was always a healthy curiosity of what it means to be a Democrat. What is my activism really about? What is it producing? And I think the biggest friction of just being involved in politics that was different from the people around me was that I grew up in pretty sometimes dire poverty. I was in and out of foster care when I was a kid. I was raised by a single mom, and I don't think she ever made more than $1,000 a month, and so we had to make a lot of tough decisions on budgeting during that time. But when I was entering high school, my mom moved us, my little brother and I, 8 blocks from San Jose schools to Cupertino schools, so I could go to Cupertino High School in what is now Silicon Valley. It was his pre-Apple days. But it's where Hewlett-Packard engineers sent their kids. And so when I went to that high school at age 14, my culture changed quickly because I was around kids who talked about going to college not as some epic dream, fairy tale. It's actually a rite of passage. It's just everybody went to college at Cupertino High School. And I, up until that time, never really thought about those things. We thought about how to survive till Friday, and my culture changed. And I would come home and tell my mom, I think I'm going to go on to college, and she would say, "That's great, that's nice," and I'd rub my feet and get me a Diet Coke, and I just made me more resilient to want to go to college. But that high school in California at that time was a pre-Prop 13. I'm the class in 1977 at Cupertino High School, which means I'm the last year of the fully funded Pat Brown Master Plan of Education, envy of the world public education system in California. The year after I graduated from high school, we had Prop 13. But there was, as good as that high school was, it was really built for 20% of the people. And they used to tell us, I remember I could hear it from teachers, 20% you're going to do great things and go on to college, start businesses, become lawyers, doctors. 20% of you, we really can't do much for. But the vast majority, as long as you can read and write, there is an economy where you can, if you have a strong back, or you can drive a truck, or do a lot of different things, you can raise a family, buy a home, and send your kids to college. And in my adult lifetime, our economy has changed, and that once great public education system was being dismantled. And what passed as debate, as I was involved in politics for all those years, was the left, which I'm a member of, just kind of being incredibly unresponsive, fleeing the system, and just saying, just give more money to a failed centralized system that was built for a different time. And then the right's response was, it's the teachers' union's fault, let's privatize it, or indifference. Now, I understand why the right is the way they are, being a yellow dog Democrat, but what I couldn't understand is how my political involvement, working on campaigns, working in politics, trying to make change, netted so little result on education. The one example that changed that was Gary Hart, who was a state senator in Santa Barbara, who everybody at UCSB worked for and adored. He sponsored the first charter school law in 1992. And that created an alternative, and he was a liberal Democrat. And I think a lot of the original cracks that led to charter schools were initiated by liberal Democrats and Democratic Party folks. And I remember running into Gary at a funeral for Walter Capps, who was a professor of mine and a mentor who later on became a congressman. And Gary had mentioned to me just off the hand, I hadn't seen him in a while, and he said, and I was talking about schools, and I was at a place in time where I was searching, and he said, you should go talk to this guy, Reed Hastings. I just met him. He's a Silicon Valley guy, he's up at Stanford, and he's thinking about sponsoring an initiative to lift the cap of my original legislation. And so Reed Hastings, I just remember writing that down later on that night. And that began my weird journey into charter schools. Now, at that same time, those 3 or 4 years leading up to that, I had lost a younger brother to drugs. I'd lost a mom, and I'd buried a stepdad who I wasn't that close with. And so around that same time, I was working on television at Disney. They produced some shows that I was working on and hosting and co-hosting. And I had to sign a paperwork that said, what's your next of kin? And I had a chocolate lab. That was my next of kin. I mean, it's a weird feeling when you're in your mid to late 30s and you don't have anybody. And so that midlife crisis and searching how I went from having this pretty terrific life, going to college, having these great jobs, writing a book, doing things that a lot of my friends were not able to do, I was kind of lucked into or seized at the time. All of a sudden my life unraveled, and losing my younger brother, who came from the same mom and 2 kids that were raised by the same love, to have 2 incredibly different outcomes. And those outcomes started to change dramatically when we entered into that big, huge high school. That high school in Cupertino was really built for me. I could shoot 3-pointers. I was loud. I had a big personality. My younger brother, Michael, was chubby. His glasses never quite fit. He was quiet. He was artistic. He would try to, when he tried to join things, like he tried to join the band. And when the chubby kid joins the band, the instrument they always seem to get is the tuba. Now, if you've ever seen a kid get on and off a school bus with a tuba, it's very funny and very sad at the same time, especially when it's your younger brother. And our lives just started separating. It was the late 70s, so he did pretty much every drug you could do, and I still never had a drug harder than a glass of red wine. And so I played basketball. He dropped out. I became student body president. He took the GED. I went to college. He went in the Navy because the judge told him he had to go to the Navy or go to jail. And our lives just started separating. And so when it didn't end well for Michael, it really haunted me, and how did I get all the breaks and how did he not get those breaks? And I thought back about where that separation started happening, and it was in high school. Now, it wasn't the high school's fault. It's just, those schools were really built for a certain group of kids. And a lot of kids just get, left behind and fall through the cracks. And so that was a haunting memory. So being in a midlife crisis mode, being alone, still looking for the purpose of politics, and then finding somebody like Reed Hastings and Don Shalvey at that time, who were optimistic. They weren't driven by fear, which everything, in politics and business, you're shackled by fear. You don't try things. You're afraid to fail. And being around Reed, who was it seemed like a real authentic member of Silicon Valley, where my roots are from, was a breath of fresh air. I met Reed Hastings and Don Shalvey briefly, and then I went up to, President Clinton was coming out to California to bring Chelsea to Stanford. It was really the main purpose. But also to announce a startup fund for 3,000 charter schools by the year 2000. And so the domestic policy department at the White House, I was still friends with a lot of the folks there, and every time they would come out to California, they would sometimes run things by me and run names by me and who we missing and just doing background stuff. And so I went up to see this event. It was on a Thursday in September, and the whole time I was consumed with going by the event to say hi, but I was also consumed with the Dodgers were playing the Giants at Candlestick that afternoon. So there's a little side trip there. But at the event, I met Reed. President Clinton announced this fund, which was really forward thinking and not very, it wasn't exactly, it was a really kind of pushing the envelope at the time, calling for that many charter schools and creating a fund for it. But I met Reed and I met Don Shalvey, and I had an immediate connection with them. And I said, I want to help on this thing. And then right before the end of the speech, I jumped in my car and drove over to Candlestick Park, and so to watch the Dodgers, and thought about these guys on the long drive home back to Los Angeles, and immediately contacted them the next day and joined this campaign. Now the campaign was, let's qualify an initiative. And so the idea was to amass 1 million signatures and then use it for some kind of leverage. And so, but on Sunday nights, we would have these long conference calls, and I recognized some of the consultants from Democratic politics. I knew of some of the ones from Republican politics. There was a lot of people speaking. It was almost too many people with too many ideas, so I would just put it on speakerphone and listen. And after one of the meetings, there was a lot of conversation about it's too confusing for the signature gatherers what charter schools were. Some of them were pushing back on what charter schools were. The city of Los Angeles was changing its city charter, and that was on the ballot, which was very confusing when you just mentioned the word charter. Nobody even knew what a charter school was. And these guys would go back and forth, and some of it was just, fishing for clients, or I don't know what was going on. There was a lot of agendas going on. And I called Reed afterwards and said, best way I think to test some ideas out is where's your local market? And he said, well, I live in Santa Cruz. There's a Safeway down the street. And I said, why don't you meet me there tomorrow? And I'll get up early and drive up to Santa Cruz, and let's get some petitions. And let's test some of these ideas out. And Reed was great. He was game. He wasn't above it. He thought it was a great idea. So we went out, and this is my background. My background was in organizing, community organizing. A supermarket is a perfect place to test ideas and theories and themes and branding, because you've got 30 seconds from somebody with their shopping list that gets out of a car, that gets into the market to connect with them and get them to stop and sign something. It's very difficult to pull off, and you have to be very good at it, and you have to have a strong message that connects with them right away. So I gave the clipboard to Reed. He rolled up his sleeves and very earnest. And some woman gets out of the shop, and he goes, we're at public charter schools, and we're trying to change this, and she just walked right by him. And like 5 or 6 people blew by him as he was trying to explain what this was. And then I said, can I try it? And let me just try something. He wasn't frustrated. He was very, eager to learn, or was thought I knew something. And the first person walked out, I go, hey, this is an initiative to improve California public schools. The person, oh yeah? Right. Sign. I got 4 or 5 signatures right away. Only when somebody asked how, then I can explain that in some neighborhoods there needs to be alternatives. We've gotten stagnant. We're not the same California we used to be. You could strike up a conversation to explain it. But most people, if you just said this is an initiative to improve California public schools and bring them back to the status they used to be, people that just connect with people. And so, what I suggested was we got baseball hats that just said public schools on them, and give them to I'm fond of baseball hats, especially my Dodger baseball hat. But I said, let's just give the signature gatherers that we're paying, but are also having a hard time collecting signatures, let's just give them the baseball hats that say public schools on it. And after that, we just we were connecting signatures faster than we could collect them. It was great. One Saturday morning, this is around the same time, the LA Unified came up with a study that said that they were 100 schools short of serving the population of Los Angeles. And it was a front page article in the LA Times. And I'm reading it, and there was a map of Los Angeles, and it had green dots where the need was the greatest. The red dots where the need was, and green dots where there was already enough schools. And so obviously, predictably, the red dots were all through South Central, Boyle Heights, Inglewood, just along the 110 and the 105, if you can imagine that on the freeway map of Los Angeles, where the high need areas were. 100 schools short, and 2/3 of the need were high schools. And in fact, in the article, and something I already knew, Los Angeles hadn't built a high school in 33 years. Wilson High School was the last one. The only thing that happened during that time is the population tripled. So you didn't build any new schools, and the population tripled. And then white people, and then a lot of people who wanted it, black people fled the system. So Los Angeles at that time was an over 80% Latino school district. with God knows what the breakdown is of undocumented and disinfected as far as a political force. And so high schools were obviously, since nobody had built a high school in a long time, Shalvey was doing his elementary schools, KIPP was known for their middle schools, but nobody was doing high schools. And I'd had this experience where my life changed at 14. So I thought if you could take on the highest need, being high schools, in the highest need areas, and show improvement, dramatic improvement, then everything else should get easier. This was my bizarre idea about change. Also, I was single. I'd never been married. I never had kids. And I used to tell people, just to be flip, that little kids creep me out, and I can at least talk to high school kids. But that wasn't the real reason. It was just that need, the base of need. And so then I set out to find out what was the biggest need area of Los Angeles. Where was the biggest dropout rate? Well, there's a lot of places you can go to. I was mentoring kids at Jordan High School in Watts. That school for years would have 1,500 ninth grade kids and then 500 sophomore kids. So I'm not a Rand fellow, but somewhere between 9th and 10th grade, we're losing 1,000 kids. And people can jimmy it and explain it any way they want. But that was happening around the city. But I found this community called Lenox. Now, Lenox is, when you're flying into Los Angeles at LAX, the last houses you see before parking lot C and the runway is Lenox, which just begs the idea, who would live under a flight pattern where you're getting one of the most popular, overused airports in the country just dumps oil and gas on you all the time? Well, this unincorporated 2 square miles there was a K-8 system. Those 2 unincorporated square miles had the highest concentration of poverty, and 70% of the kids from this little community would go to Hawthorne High School after 8th grade, and 70% of them would not make it out of Hawthorne High School. Now, Don Shalvey was one of the few people that would understand this, and anybody with gray hair would understand this. Hawthorne High School was known for one thing and one thing only, nationally and internationally. That's where the Beach Boys met. That's where the California dream was, hatched. Well, there's no blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids at Hawthorne High School. There was a time when the defense industry and aerospace people they lived in Hawthorne and Inglewood, and they would send their kids there. But they had long left that community. And so 7 out of 10, I met a superintendent, Bruce McDaniel, who saw that Don Shalvey was on my board, and Don was famous, so he knew I was somewhat legitimate. We started talking about doing a high school. I actually would sit in this guy's office, and we actually wrote the charter together, which was 44 pages, which became the first Green Dot school in Lenox. And so then I needed kids. And so this community, I found out 3 things immediately from people in the community and the kids that I started to meet. 1, Lenox is the place where people from Inglewood are afraid to go. 2, because it's unincorporated, the kids and the families used to call it Little TJ, because there's no Burger Kings or supermarkets or nationally known things. It's unincorporated, so it looked like a little Latino village, Mexican village. If you've ever driven around Mexico, which I spent a lot of time driving around Mexico, it really looked like Mexico. And that was the 7 out of 10 kids weren't graduating. And my interaction with the kids at the middle school that fed into what was going to become Anima Leadership Charter High School were really bright kids, and it didn't make any sense to me these kids couldn't make it. So I met kids and faculty at the middle school. I would do some precinct walking. I would walk door to door with this petition. I got a lot of reactions from people like, oh, I've never seen A, somebody knocking on my door, period, or B, a big white guy with a Dodger hat on. But usually I was with a kid or a teacher from the school. And we got the word out that Lenox was going to create its first. They had a high school 20 years before, which folded, but we were going to create a high school and build on what was happening in the K-8 system. And so at the beginning there was weariness, and then I hired a couple of the teachers from the middle school, which gave it an endorsement. This is a very tight-knit community, and so I started to have some momentum. And so all of that door knocking and building up, and what's the other interesting that happened is that a lot of the faculty at the middle school, who were very protective of their kids and have a lot of ownership, they had a lot of advice on what to do and what not to do. And so I would go every Friday mornings at 7 at the Denny's right on Century Boulevard that leads into the airport. And the superintendent would bring different people, stakeholders, and they would give me my my wisdom or Dutch uncle advice or leeriness or whatever. But all of this led up to a parent night where the different schools would come and pitch their wares from high school to the families. And so it was a 4-hour meeting, and I was the last thing on the agenda, which I was really a little pissed about. I thought, man, these guys are, they're sandbagging me, man. These guys are bigfooting me. Why are they putting me at the end? Because I just thought about, like, my mom working all day, missing a shift, waiting tables, coming to this thing and sitting for 4 hours. I always thought about that time and place where she never felt real comfortable at the public schools that I went to. She was never felt accepted. But I went to this thing, and it was remarkable. Every family was there. They stayed, and then the most popular meeting that night was this auditorium, which was jam-packed with families from Lenox, the Lenox community. And I did a presentation. I had an interpreter, talked about the school. There weren't that many questions, and which I was shocked by. I thought, oh no, I just laid a dud here. They're just not coming. And then I said, I have sign-up sheets in the front, and almost everybody in that auditorium surged forward. And I was there for 2 hours, and I'm looking at these amazing people. And these are folks, you have to understand, that are almost all 95% under the poverty line. They make the beds, they wash the dishes, they cook the meals around the LAX area. They're the laborers. Up to about half of them are undocumented. And so they're really at the toughest level, but almost everybody in that room had risked everything to come to that time and place. And when people risk everything and challenge your comfort zone in such an amazing way, they're not coming to Los Angeles for the high-end jobs and the ticker tape parades and the warm welcoming. It's usually to take the jobs nobody else wants. So you ask the motivation, and you have to understand, the best part about this job is that I get to challenge all my preconditioning. Yes, I have Mexican friends and I have Central American friends, but this is really, when you're the only white person in the room and you're offering up something and you're immersing yourself into this community, you have to let go of the idea that race is not blinding you, or you don't have preconditions, and you're not. Most people at that time and place would say, well, only certain people care about their education. But here are these folks that have nothing but their kids. And they really have risked everything, and it made sense to me that they came to this country for their kids, not for any other reason. Why would you come to this country? Think about the politics of 1999, where we were as a country, as far as undocumented language. We just gone through a couple initiatives, English only. Prop 187 had just happened. This is all in the backdrop of this. And this responsibility of this surge of people that really just wanted something better for their kids. And we signed up their class within 2 hours. I didn't have enough petitions. We just had to start making our own petitions. And it was overwhelming and exhausting, but also it was real now. And so I went out to my car, my 1974 Volvo station wagon, which I used to have a nice convertible. I traded that in, and now I got this car. I'm now a year and a half into this journey where I'm paying myself out of my life savings an $800 a month stipend. My friends have done interventions. You haven't even taught. What are you doing? What do you mean you're starting a school? Nobody knows what a charter school even is. And I go out to the car, and I've got these petitions with all these people who've just given me everything they have, and I threw up. And I don't know. I can't remember the last time I threw up. Maybe from having too many beers in college. I got so overwhelmed by the responsibility, and I just sat in the car for like a half hour and just shook and just went, what did I just do? Now it's real. You have to understand, I didn't have a site yet for the school. So people had this was in May or April. School's going to open in 5 months. I don't have a site. I've got a couple of teachers I'm thinking about. This is a city that hasn't built a high school in 33 years. There's no roadmaps. And most people, especially, and a lot of people in the charter community as well, would say, at that age, you got to kind of give up on those kids. Well, my life changed at 14, so I had this stubbornness about it. But it was an overwhelming responsibility. And there I sat in that parking lot for a good half hour, just freaked out.